who is the head of size at
No, IIS.
Huh?
Rujan is head of size. I'm head of IIS.
Oh, the head of IIS at National Science Foundation. He had a distinguished career at Bell Labs before, and he's going to talk to us about what if computers do to memory what they have done to arithmetic.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be a very strange talk, and I hope it will be informal, and I'll just make more and more outrageous statements, and if it doesn't go if nobody reacts, then I'll just give up and start talking about how we fund things at NSF. But what this is about is the problem of we are getting close to a world in which you could walk around with something that would remember everything you had ever seen or heard or read. And what would this mean for us? This idea has been suggested a number of times. I heard Ted Nelson propose it in 1985. Jim Gray mentioned it in his Turing lecture last year. And the issue is how many of the things that you want to know are really something that you once knew but forgot. You know, Plato said that everything you know is something you once knew but you've forgotten. And you know, we really could walk around with everything. There was a guy got a PhD at the Media Lab for walking around with a video camera strapped to his head for 2 years. He said it was very convenient. You know, he never lost his sweater. If he couldn't remember where his sweater or where umbrella was, all he had to do was back up the tape to the last time he had seen them, and then he knew where they were. What would you do? Well, one of the issues here is, well, how much information really is there? Conventionally, people say the Library of Congress has 20 terabytes of information. And I know where the 20 terabytes came from, because I'm one of the people who repeats that number. There are 20 million books, and the ASCII characters in a big fat book are about a megabyte. Moby Dick is about 1.1 megabytes of ASCII. Pride and Prejudice is about half a megabyte. So 20 million books and a megabyte each, that's 20 terabytes. But in fact, there's lots of other stuff in the Library of Congress. There's 13 million photographs. They think their photographs are really high quality, so they would get offended if I didn't suggest that each photograph was worth a megabyte. So that's another 13 terabytes. They have 4 million maps. The 50 megabytes for a map is actually conservative. I once visited there, and they showed me this scanner that was a 24 by 36 inch flatbed scanner with 600 DPI resolution times 24 bits per pixel. If you multiply that out, it's about 900 megabytes for each map. And the big question on their mind, the real thing they wanted to know from me was, what kind of searching can we do in the compressed domain? We can never afford to decompress any of these. They have about 500,000 movies. At a gig each, that's about 500 terabytes. You may say that I'm being very stingy with the bits for a movie, given how generous I've been with the bits for the pictures. Well, you may also say, how can there be, 500,000 movies in the entire history of Hollywood? They only made about 100,000 movies, and 50,000 of them are lost. And the answer is these are all 20-minute industrial training films. So they're not very high quality, and nobody really cares how you digitize. Strangely enough, when I did this calculation, the biggest number was that there are like 3.5 million sound recordings, most of which are CDs. So they're 500 megabytes each. The reason they're mostly CDs is there was no requirement to deposit copyrighted sound recordings until 1970-something. And so most of the old sound recordings are not in the Library of Congress. They do not have the nation's best collection of things like vinyl.
What about things like Woody Guthrie?
They don't have very much of that unless it's been reissued. If you want a really good collection of old vinyl, go to some place like Rutgers. They're private. They're actually, the Library of Congress does not claim to be particularly strong in old sound recording. They do have some things. They have all of Edison's old cylinders, but all of the old wax cylinders, they were only like 2 minutes each. It's an interesting story, by the way, with respect to adoption of technology. One of the questions people say is, well, why did wax cylinders lose out to vinyl discs? The answer is the wax cylinder patent belonged to Edison. So he had control of what came out on wax cylinders. He believed that, this should only be used for high social purposes. So he wouldn't let trashy popular songs be recorded in his format. They were all things like hymns. And so he lost out to the other technology because he had the wrong content, and people wanted to buy trashy popular songs. I wound up with 3,000 terabytes, 3 petabytes for the Library of Congress. 3 petabytes sounds like a lot, but I believe that this year the estimate for how much disk will be sold in the world is 800 petabytes. Now, admittedly, most of that disk is storing multiple copies of Microsoft Windows 98, but there's still a lot out there. I tried to make some other measures. There's about 38 million tons of the kind of paper that is being used for writing and printing made in the US, sold in the US each year. That's about a quarter of all the paper. The rest of it is cardboard and paper towels and things like that. But if you make some estimate about how many copies of each document there are, you say maybe there's 40 terabytes of written material. There's about 4,000 movies made in the world each year. There's about 52 billion snapshots taken in the world each year. You just look at how much film do Kodak and Fuji sell. We're not going to be able to get that number. With digital cameras, we'll never know if somebody clicks the shutter and erases the picture. But we have some idea how much film is sold. There's a huge amount of CDs and cassettes. These are the current marketing numbers for how much is sold each year for CDs, cassettes, and there are still 20 million vinyl discs being sold every year. They are now special collector's items, and the number is not going down very fast. So I think if you add this up, you would get like 400 petabytes, but there's only about 15 terabytes of different stuff. There's not all that many different recordings. The biggest number I found, and I didn't touch the home VCR, the home video cameras, was that if you look at how much talk there is on the telephone, if you digitized all the phone calls and tried to scan them, and there are people who think that the NSA does that, there'd be 4,000 petabytes a year of phone calls. So that's how much stuff there is. Yeah.
What about how much there is in people's heads?
That's actually the next slide. Thank you. What's in your life? Well, you can read, say, 400 words a minute times 2 hours a day. You can listen 150 words a minute. Now, when I show this slide to people, they complain about this number, that I'm not crediting full video input. I'm only looking at sort of 1 frame a second. And the reason is that there's no pretense that you're really absorbing every detail of 30 frames a second. I mean, or whatever, 30 a second, of course, a TV number. So I tried to make a guess. I wound up saying that, well, the amount of information flowing into you is this. Well, how much do you remember? Tom Landauer did a study on this about 15 years ago. It's done by forgetting. You know the method you use to count, how many people know how you count the number of fish in a lake? Nobody. You count the number of fish in a lake by catching 100 fish, marking them all, and throwing them back, and then catching another 100 fish. And if one of the fish you catch is, well, let's make it more statistically believable. If 5 of the fish you catch are marked, that means that 5% of the fish in the lake are the 100 fish you marked. So there are 2,000 fish in the lake. So Tom did it with forgetting. You memorize some things, and then we see how many you remembered. And you come up with an estimate that there's maybe like 200 megabytes in your head. And maybe that seems sort of reasonable. People memorize the entire Bible. That's about 5 megabytes. They don't memorize every single word of every ancient Greek text, even though there are probably people who would like to. That would be 300 megabytes. But these numbers aren't very big. 16 gigabytes is 1 disk drive, 1 2.5-inch disk drive. You could walk around with it. Steve Mann is the guy at MIT that I mentioned. He's now at Toronto. In a few years, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy something with camera, microphone, wireless modem, software, disk drive. In fact, the first place this might come is we're interested at NSF in funding things like this to help the handicapped. In other words, a deaf person could wear a camera with some software that then tried to report in some way to this person what was around them. So, well, it would all be there. It was just a matter of, do you save it? The electronic seeing eye dog. So this is practical, and it keeps getting more practical. This is a slide of RAM and disk memory prices. I really ought to update it because they've continued to go down. This stops at disk being 30 cents a megabyte. Disk is now under 3 cents a megabyte. This is a log scale plot. It's interesting that the RAM memory and disk prices are coming down at about the same rates. That's one of the reasons, I think, why I don't see as much innovation in the database industry as I would like. If disk were getting, suppose these curves were not moving at the same rate. If solid state memory were getting cheaper a lot faster than disk was, we'd see more papers about in-memory databases and random access systems, and we'd stop seeing papers about how you index relational databases. And in the other extreme, if the disk were getting a lot cheaper than the RAM, we'd see more papers about the old-fashioned polyphase sorts and things like that for getting things people used to do when you had to store things on tape and you didn't have random access at all. But because the two curves are parallel, the exact same algorithms are still the optimal ones, and so everybody keeps beating the same things to death. But we're down to 3 cents a megabyte. I mean, disk is ridiculously cheap, and there's no reason to think, therefore, that whatever we're talking about won't become ever cheaper. Some people may know that the origin of all of this, the word Memex, comes from an article that Vannevar Bush wrote in 1945 called As We May Think. How many people have read the Bush article? Oh God, this is the article that everybody knows about that started the whole field. Bush had this dream that, I mean, it came in an interesting way. He wrote this article for the July 1945 issue of the Atlantic Monthly. And what it said was, look, we've learned something important in this war. The war was just coming to an end. We've learned how to use scientists in teams. Until the Second World War, most scientists worked alone as individual researchers. The idea of a team of scientists was about as familiar to people as the idea of a team of artists is today, or a team of composers. You didn't think of that. You thought of an individual guy in his laboratory. And Bush explained that during the war we had learned, and he gave microwave radar as the example because he wasn't allowed to talk about the atomic bomb, but he certainly knew about it and was thinking about it. We've learned how to use scientists as teams, and this is a really amazing breakthrough when you think about what was accomplished scientifically in the exploitation of things like microwave radar. And he said, we have to figure out what would we do in times of peace. And he said, information. We'll have scientists building devices to help people do research. And so he had this, and he was a big expert in bar-coded microfilm. Bush never really appreciated digital technology. It was not his turf. He came out of analog technology. But he really liked bar-coded microfilm. He had, we know now, been working for 10 years on trying to build a code-breaking machine that used microfilm. And so he had a great faith in the ability of mechanical gadgets to move microfilm around. So this is a design of something where the idea is that you have these reels of microfilm that contain your library. You have these display screens you can look at. And you have a way to put things in. You write things on a piece of paper, and you put them on this screen, and you photograph them. And here's the developing tank that processes and adds it to the microfilm. And this over here is the keyboard where you punch buttons to say, you know, this is what I want to bring up next. Definitely a Rube Goldberg type of device. Bush never got his code-breaking machine to work. The British managed to do it with electronic computers. But he had a couple of interesting ideas, which one important one was that it was a very personal device. You used it for your notes. When you wanted to exchange information on a subject with other people, you went and you got their notes. There was not a great stress on, we're going to search every word of every document in the library. There was stress on, if you want to know about something, his example was the introduction of the Turkish bow into Western European hunting. You will find an expert on that subject, and you will get his notes and put them into your system and use them as a guide. And if you want to know about the relationship between the material strength of bones of different animals with respect to making bows out of horn, well, you'll go to your zoologist friend and get that trail and put it in. So it was a very personal device. He never really estimated, well, how big was this thing going to be, other than that it was going to be the size of a desk. I mean, this is one of these problems where you say to somebody, well, how big is your database? And what you want is an answer in gigabytes, and they give you in cubic meters or something. But, you know, well, my instinct is this could never have been made to work. But it was the stimulus for an enormous amount of work. I can't think of any other scientific paper from 1945 that gets the number of quotations that this one does. How much stuff, in fact, do we have on the web? Here's another log plot. These are the number of bytes on the web. Now, let me be a little careful about some of these numbers. It looks as if there's a kink in the chart, and I don't think there really is. The first 3 points come from attempts to do exhaustive sweeps of the web. In 1998, it really was becoming impossible to do that. It was no longer feasible to gather all the web pages. At the moment, the conventional wisdom is that there are 800 million web pages out there. No search engine has more than 300 million. And most of the ones that boast about how many they have are between 100 and 200 million. And the reason is that you really can't drain the whole web every day. And most of them think it's more important to get the popular pages frequently than to get every page on a delayed schedule. So they look at this as they sample the pages in some way. And all of this is ignoring the fact that there's an unknown amount of what is called dark matter on the web. The dark matter is the stuff behind corporate firewalls and corporate search engines. We don't know, just no idea how much of that stuff there is. But anyway, so these are exhaustive scans getting less and less successful. And then the last couple of points are based on sampling techniques, admitting that we can't do exhaustive scans. So the first point is Lycos, the next 3 are Alexa, and the next 2 are the NEC people who do sampling. So I think that's why we had an apparent decrease in the growth rate, and then it picked up again. It was just changes in measurement technique. Currently, the number I am told is that there's like 15 terabytes on the web, of which about 5 terabytes is text, and the rest is images. There is a huge amount of streaming audio, but since it's difficult to capture that, nobody knows how much of that stuff there is. Okay. Now, one of the things that I have to do at NSF is I tend to fund the digital library projects. I'm sort of in charge of a lot of those things, and I want to talk a little about how we're expanding the kinds of information you can hold on the web. So I just have some examples. I'm sorry, this one ought to be in color, but we'll manage. This is the Beowulf manuscript, which is worked on by Kevin Kiernan at the University of Kentucky. And this is an interesting example of digital being better than the original. Beowulf is only known to us through one manuscript. That manuscript was damaged in a fire in the 18th century and further damaged by incompetent repair in the 19th century. And what that means is that there are parts of it that could once be read that can no longer be read if you are holding the manuscript yourself. We know this because fortunately somebody had made a copy of it before the fire. Kevin Kiernan went and got it scanned with infrared light, ultraviolet light, and low incidence light. And the result was that you can read his images more easily than you can read the original. So this is not just a question of the digital version being accessible to everyone all over the world as opposed to requiring a trip to London and a sort of begging scene with the curator of manuscripts to be allowed to see it. It's available everywhere, and it's better to have the copy than it is to better than the original. That's this. I'm gone. This is something's head. It looks like it looks like the visual human, the visible human, but it's actually not. It's a very similar project we fund at University of Texas to do paleontological heads. They're scanning all sorts of animal skulls that they've dug up. This is simply, I put this in, it's an example of a face recognition program to remind me of, to tell you about one of the other strange digital libraries, which I guess I should call this one, How to Have a Digital Library That's All Bluff. There is a housing project in London with surveillance cameras. This is not unusual. It has a high crime rate. The police have linked the surveillance cameras to some system that allegedly has on file 100 faces of known criminals from that area, and he's constantly monitoring the surveillance cameras looking for these people. And what I find interesting is that this is not technically possible today. Face recognition works if you have a cooperative subject who walks up to your camera, looks at it directly, is standing in a well-lit environment and, smiling at you, and then you can do face recognition. The concept that it's working in bad lighting conditions with people scurrying around like mice is not credible. However, the crime rate in this project has dropped 30%. So apparently, in this case, bluff has been effective. I have not found in the newspapers the statistic I really want, which is, did the crime rate just drop 30% or did it move across the street? Is the crime rate going up in the neighborhood? And I don't know the answer to that.
That will still show that the cameras are effective.
Well, the story is effective. Whether the cameras have anything to do with, this, I don't know. I mean, the question is...
You have the story without the cameras actually being installed.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, another question is whether the cameras are being heavily vandalized, as one would expect. What else have we got? This is the web page of the National Gallery of the Spoken Word. One of the things that I tried to stress in the current round of digital library grants was more than just text and images, because we had a lot of that and nothing else. So we have this project, there's a project at the University of Michigan, Michigan State, my apologies, Michigan State University. Mark Kornblum is trying to build a major digital library of human speech, and basically of historically important speech. He has things like 20 years of interviews on Studs Terkel's radio show. He has samples of the speech of every president back to Grover Cleveland, not necessarily while they were president, obviously, but every president since Grover Cleveland is represented. And this is a historical resource, and obviously what they're looking at is how to index it. What do we have here? We have text, aerial photography. Terry Smith at UC Santa Barbara is trying to collect every image, every mapping-like vertical image of Ventura County and Santa Barbara County. This is a picture of a flower to represent CalFlora. This is the database of California plants, which has also been surprisingly successful. I mean, I know this is going to sound wacko, but I often use the definition of a successful computer program is when it's used by somebody you never expected to use it. And in this case, the California Department of Transportation turned out to be a major user of this digital library. And why was that? Well, Caltrans gets beat up by environmental groups for planting the wrong plants along interstate highways, that they get accused of planting exotic invasive species. their problem was they didn't actually know what the right things to plant were. And now suddenly there was a database which you could ask questions like, what should be growing at 600 feet elevation in Santa Clara County? And you could find out. So, that's it. Similarly, there's historical stuff. This is from Greg Crane's project on classical information. He's trying to build a simulation of ancient Rome, among other things. This is Carnegie Mellon doing face spotting, Howard Lofton.
How do you determine what should be grown at such and such an altitude?
Oh, you look at the database. There are all these records entered by the botanists which say, we found the following thing in the following place.
Okay, so you answer the question, what is or has been grown?
What has been growing there long enough ago that we believe it is not a garden escape. There's some old information there, and one of the fascinating things I would like to find an excuse to find money to digitize is that before Yosemite was accepted as a national park, somebody sent a team of field biologists out to write down what was in this area, because maybe it wasn't really a rich enough or diverse enough area to qualify as a national park. Now, the concept that somebody doubted whether Yosemite Valley qualified as a national park boggles my mind, but I guess in 1870, nobody knew very much about what was there. So these biologists went out and they came back with their notebooks. Those notebooks are in a basement at Berkeley. And you know, so we know quite accurately what plants and animals were growing in Yosemite before there was any development, before there was any air pollution, before anybody was camping or driving in the area. And you know, someday we have to get that data out and look and try to compare it with what's there now and try to understand the differences. I'm going to skip some of this. All I'm trying to say here is there is a vast amount of stuff that is out there, and we can process it now. We have digital libraries of images, text, videos. So if we, in fact, do record everything you read and everything you see, I believe I can say with some justice, you would actually be able to find things that you cared about and a lot. Now, oh, right. You can also talk to other people. I put this one. This is the web page emblem for the Upper Atmosphere Research Collaboratory. And this is about communications. This is about changes in science. So actually, let me talk about changes in science. Because I think this is actually probably the most important thing I want to say, which is what would the effect be on science if we did this? Because you can see some of the things happening already. The protein and genome data banks have really transformed molecular biology. Once upon a time, if you were a molecular biologist and you had a gene and you wanted to know what it did, well, once upon a time you wouldn't have had a clue. Then there was a long period when you say, aha, we know what to do. We'll take this gene, we'll feed it to the transfer RNA mechanism in some cell and see what protein it synthesizes. And then we'll know what it does. Now you don't do that. You go look in the data bank and you say, what's the most similar gene to this one? And what does it do? And the reality is that data mining is much faster than wet chemistry. So molecular biology has really been transformed by the existence of these databases. My problem, from the standpoint of the government officials that I want to convince, is that there aren't any good metrics. I can't say molecular biology databases have meant that the number of staff years per new drug invented has gone down 7.3%. The Office of Management and Budget would love that. They're desperate for any numbers measuring scientific progress, whether they make any sense or not. Their favorite one is the one that 1/3 of U.S. economic growth comes from the IT industry. I have no idea. The IT, the information technology industry, is allegedly responsible for 1/3 of U.S. economic growth. I have no problem repeating that number. I can quote any number of Clinton's speeches in which he said it. I have no idea where the number came from. Nobody, you know, the whole question of whether the computer industry is increasing or decreasing national productivity has been argued about for 10 years. Tom Landauer, who I mentioned earlier, wrote a book a couple of years ago entitled The Trouble with Computers, whose thesis was that computers were not improving national productivity at all, following on the work of an economist named Stephen Roach at Morgan Stanley who argued that. The current solution to this quandary has been to redefine the economic statistics. So I don't know where this stuff comes from, but it would be nice if I had numbers like this for science. I don't. What I can tell you is that it has been a real transformation in scientific research to have wet chemistry giving way to data mining. The next science that I believe is going to be transformed this way is astronomy. Astronomers used to go off to Kitt Peak for their 2 weeks a year, choose what part of the sky they wanted to photograph, take pictures to confirm or dispute some theory they were interested in, and then go back to their office and study the pictures. There is now far more observational data of the sky than anybody needs. 99% of all the stuff the NASA satellites are bringing down is never looked at by anybody for any reason. And that is going to be the future. If you need a picture of part of the sky, you won't need to go photograph it. You'll just go look and find it. So I think there's going to be a massive change in astronomy. And maybe some of these things are good. Would it be to your advantage when you went into the hospital if somebody took your medical chart and just routinely shoved it into Medline and said, tell me about other patients whose charts look like this? There is actually evidence. Someone has done the medical people are great on controlled studies. I mean, the medical people could teach us all lessons about how to get money out of the government. Like they have databases of which disease is in each congressman's family. We don't at NSF have even a database of which grants are in which districts. But one of the things somebody has done is to look at hospital patients for whom Medline searches are done at entry to the hospital and hospital patients for which Medline searches are not done. And indeed, if a Medline search is done on you when you enter the hospital, you have somewhat better recovery rates and outcome rates than other people. So this is probably a good idea. What this says is we might not need to do experiments. We might do data mining. But there's all sorts of complications here. The reason that this data mining stuff works is that data is being gathered for which there is no immediate need, and most dramatically by NASA. Maybe this is wasted effort. Maybe instead of maybe just-in-time data gathering was a good idea. I don't know. I mean, at the moment, some of this data is gathered so mechanically that it hardly seems worth trying to economize on collecting it. But there must be some wasted effort here. A big problem that I worry about is the status questions within science. Digging in the library doesn't have high prestige. This was driven home to me. I visited the American Museum of Natural History, and somebody commented to me that if you add up among all the museums of science around the world, there were like 3 billion specimens in basements. And there's relatively little exploitation of many of these because they don't travel well. They're often fragile or bulky or what. So in order to see them, you have to go to the place where they are, and there may not be a good enough catalog to tell you where that is. But what if we just sort of digitized all of them? Like we're doing some paleontological fossils are being done in Austin. Well, there's still this issue of to become a curator at a major museum, the thing you want on your resume is that you led a field expedition. If all you did was rummage in somebody's basement, that's not as good a credential. So you've got to change, if you want to say that it would be efficient in paleontology or archaeology to switch the focus from new digs to thinking about what's been dug up in the past but never been looked at, you have to change the social status to say that it will be just as rewarded to make a new discovery in the basement as it is to make one by going out there and digging. And then, of course, there's a risk for that. If, in fact, you then create a generation of curators who have never actually dug anything up themselves, maybe they won't understand what they're seeing when they read the field notes of somebody who did dig something up. So you've got all sorts of dangers there. As a real example that worries me, There was a time when you didn't have simulators and you learned to fly an airplane by flying an airplane. You can no longer be type qualified. You now can be qualified to fly a new kind of jetliner without ever flying it. You can be qualified just by flying it in a simulator, and in fact you can't be qualified without flying it in the simulator. Now I understand the bit about you can't be qualified without flying it in the simulator, because what they want to do is they want the pilot to demonstrate command of emergency maneuvers that are too dangerous to do in a real airplane. But the concept that you never have to fly the real airplane even once sort of still emotionally bothers me. The guy in the cockpit is making his first flight in this real airline. And with respect to science, this is the Upper Atmosphere Research Collaboratory. I comment here, the idea is you want to work with other scientists. It doesn't matter whether you're at the right place. Now, the Upper Atmosphere Research Collaboratory started with a very practical issue of there are some instruments up in Greenland. Greenland is very far away, very uncomfortable to go to. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get the data from these instruments without going there? But it's now turned into a big thing in which these the atmospheric physicists talk to each other around the world and collaborate. And it's suggesting that maybe in the future we won't need, it'll be possible to imagine a Nobel Prize winner working in his or her basement. There won't be any need to actually go places or to have colleagues right there physically. I've been talking about digital libraries in the spread. I'll just demonstrate. The DLI-1 projects ran from 94 to 98. This is where they were located, those 6 dots. This is the combination of DLI-2, the International Digital Library projects, and the leadership grants of the IMLS. So we're really suddenly covering a lot more places. And in fact, one of those dots is in Baltimore because there's a DLI-2 project at Johns Hopkins, Professor Chowdhury, on the Lester Levy sheet music collection is another example of broadening out. So we're getting more and more research done on this. And needless to say, in addition to what NSF spends, there's a lot more money pouring in from the dot-coms. This is this revenue curve for Amazon. Now, revenue, not profits. Amazon still, as far as I know, is losing about $7 a book. The number for the full year number for 99 is, I think, over 1 billion. I'm not sure that I've actually seen it. There's just this vast amount of information pouring through. So, what are some of the other things that might be happening? Well, one interesting recent fuss that has come up is copywriting course notes. And I find this interesting with respect to, well, what happens to education if you've got all of this stuff? Are you better off going to a university and studying with a local teacher or looking at some famous course over the web? I mean, maybe should you study physics from a Nobel Prize winner who's giving lectures somewhere else or from your own sort of routine physics professor? Certainly when movies made it possible to see sort of Jack Benny, let me actually go back. When radio made it possible to hear Jack Benny instead of your local vaudeville hall, vaudeville died. And maybe sort of local teaching will die, I don't know. And one of the interesting steps this way is that you can now get student notes for a lot of classes on the web. And there's been a fuss in which the universities are trying to deal with this by copywriting the content of their courses to deal with the private companies selling the notes and competing with each other. But what's sitting here is, to me, is, well, is there really a qualitative difference between whether you sit in class writing in a notebook, sit in class typing on your laptop, or record the sound on your laptop?
And whether you are passive in 3 different ways.
Yeah, but there's a history here. There was a time when people said that it wasn't adequate to read a book. You had to copy it out yourself if you expected to know it. And there was a time before that in one of the Platonic dialogues, Socrates talks about how just reading, writing and reading are cheats. If you don't memorize it, you haven't really understood it. So, we're sort of backing off steadily. Again, the question is, what do you need? If the goal is simply to know that Columbus, made his voyage in 1492, it may be adequate if you can just find that quickly whenever you need it. You don't really have to memorize. I'll talk about some other opportunities. There's lots of other places where things like this would matter. About a quarter of the employees in a typical U.S. hospital are clerical employees. There is something like 200 million to be saved in the healthcare system if you could get most of the record keeping automated. And I think that's feasible. And in fact, it was part of Bill Bradley's campaign platform. That's where I got the number from. Don King estimates that about 1/5 of the time of a typical scientist is spent looking for information. So you say, gee, everybody could work 20% faster if they could just, get all the information immediately. I would never have anticipated eBay. The concept that, all sorts of people would spend their life in a nationwide garage sale boggles my mind. I talked about this business of the seeing eye computer. And in fact, but Jim Gray made another very interesting comment in his Turing Award lecture when he said, look, why do we just talk about giving blind people normal eyesight? Why don't we build a gadget that gives everybody the eyesight of an eagle? Why shouldn't we all be walking around with devices, not just the blind and the deaf, but we should all be walking around with devices that give us the eyesight of an eagle and the hearing of a rabbit and the strength of a gorilla or something. And I've actually, there are serious questions here. I mean, somebody has said to me, if your eye got the visual input that an eagle's eye get, you wouldn't be able to cope with it because your whole image processing system in your brain is accustomed to a certain bit rate and it couldn't deal with 100 times as many bits. And if you say, oh, well, only look at a little bit of the field of view, well, then that's a different experience, and there's probably a good reason why you want the breadth of field that you have rather than more focus on a little one. There are also less serious doubters, or rather less respectable doubters. This is a full-page ad from the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. Up at the top is a picture of a chip, and it says, this is the latest thing in microprocessors. In 12 months, it will be obsolete. And then the next thing says, this is a brick. In 12 months, it will still be the latest thing in bricks. And the stuff here you can't read says, at Hansen, we invest in things of permanent value, and goes on to talk about why they are in construction rather than microprocessors. Well, this ad ran in 1993. Hansen has been deconglomerated. It was a conglomerate which has since fallen apart. So they lost. Luddites don't win. But there's other things. I worry about, if we go into this world where everything you do is online and you don't have to do anything for yourself, and it doesn't matter where anything is, everybody has one of these. So if I want to think of myself as being in San Francisco, I can imagine it. I don't have to worry about going there, which, is an interesting thing. One of my friends, Howard Besser, gave a course that was taught jointly between the University of Michigan and the University of California, Berkeley. And he would spend 1 month in each place, and all the lectures were video cast, and the students would watch them wherever he was. The students would stay where they were. It was observed that the Berkeley students were fairly happy and the Michigan students were grumpy. And they tried to find out why, and it turned out, well, the Michigan students didn't like seeing the Berkeley students coming into class wearing sandals and t-shirts when they were walking into class wearing heavy boots and overcoats because it was snowing outside. So, I don't know, this relocation, logical relocation. More serious to me is I'm trying to understand whether, if everything goes online, we will have more or less diversity in what is available to you. Compare video stores and bookstores. The typical video store does 80% of its rentals on the top 20 movies. That's inconceivable in a bookstore. In order to get 80% of the sales in a bookstore, you're not talking about 20 books. You're not even talking about 200 books. You're talking about 2,000 books. There's much greater variety in the number of books available than there is in the number of videos available. Now, what's going on here? Why are there some things where there's more diversity and some where there's less? And part of it has to do with the economics of how easy it is to distribute something. New England used to be mostly farms. It is now mostly forest. And the reason is that when the railroads made it possible to bring produce cheaply from the Midwest, New England farms became depopulated. And this has been going on now for 150 years. So what I worry about is, as I say, maybe it's good or maybe it's bad if instant accessibility of digital information everywhere means that we sort of destroy the faculty in most of the universities in the United States in favor of a few video courses from a few big shots. The University of Phoenix, this private university that sort of teaches things on demand and has no faculty, is sort of the threat that we worry about. Now, I try to tell people not to worry. I give as the example, once upon a time, accountants were people who were good with arithmetic, right? They could add up numbers fast. And then calculators came in, and all of a sudden, it doesn't matter whether you can add up numbers or not. Does that mean that accountants have now disappeared? No. Accountants now run all the major corporations, except for the ones that are run by lawyers, as far as I can see. So I believe that similarly, when alphabetizing things and putting books on shelves become totally irrelevant skills, this will boost librarianship rather than kill it off. But I must say there's a lot of people who don't believe me and they say, no, I'm worried. Publishers, librarians, they're all afraid that somehow in this new world they won't be there. The question I get asked in NSF is, well, what technology do we need? You have this dream, and in your dream, anybody can get any piece of information they want. You started by saying they'll get it if they once knew it, because you're going to remember everything. But now you took all these individuals, all their machines, and you linked them all together. So you'll be able to get anything that anybody knows. Maybe they'll have some way of saying, I don't want other people to know about this bit of my life. But there are many things other people know. I mean, for some reason the other day I wanted to know, was there a foot passage through the Blackwall Tunnel in England? This is not an easy question to answer in the United States. It's a very trivial question for people on the site. So maybe if I could just plug into one of them, it would be a simple thing to answer. So we've gone on. We now want to have sort of this whole world, what H.G. Wells called the world brain. We sort of linked all the information. What do we need to do this? People say, okay, obvious one is indexing and sound, image and sound indexing, so that we can search images and sounds properly. We don't do a very good job on this. Now, we're sort of okay on text searching. I mentioned that the typical search engine has 100 to 200 million pages. Yahoo has its specially selected file of 3 million pages. Everybody, from Yahoo to the people with 300 million pages, has user satisfaction rates of about 85% based on surveys. And about 85% of the people asked if their search engine is doing a good enough job say yes. And it doesn't have anything to do with how many pages it has. So it looks as if for text indexing we're okay. We're not on indexing, on image and sound indexing. We don't do a good job on putting searches in context. And the fact that if I ask a question about if I ask a question about French literature, it's probably a very elementary question. If Jacques Chirac asks a question about French literature, it's probably a very sophisticated question. We don't understand things like that. We don't understand how we would separate personal and public files. We're very bad on this issue of what are the things that are in my file system that I wouldn't mind other people seeing, and what are the things that I don't want other people to see, and how much of this should be passed on. And we all know about this in terms of telemarketing. There are some things where I might have said arbitrarily, I don't care whether anybody knows this or not, but then somebody discovers that I've bought a ticket to the following Shakespeare play, and I suddenly get drowned in email from every arts group in Washington, D.C. Don't I want to become a member? And then, a mailbox fills up with crap. We don't actually have the eyeglass cameras, although people are developing that. And one of the big issues is high-speed wireless. If I'm in fact going to be walking around browsing the web, well, I need better connectivity. I spend 5 hours a week on the Metroliner, and I'm eagerly awaiting the day that I can buy a useful cellular modem of some sort that will actually let me sort of remain connected to work during those 5 hours. Some things, as I say, we might not want. Searching in the background. I mean, this is a project I heard about at Microsoft. Basically, we'll watch everything you type on your computer. Every time you pause, we'll take the last 5 words you type, no matter what you were doing with them, typing them into email or word processing, and we'll do a search on the web and say, hey, here's what you're thinking about. Well, I'm not sure I want computers that intrusive. Finding other people with common interests. Well, you know, we did a project at Belcour once. Will Hill and Jim Holland and George Furness did this. They went and asked 200 people to rate the movies they had seen. They gave them a list of 500 movies, and they rated them all from 1 to 10. And then we modeled each person's movie viewing and started giving them recommendations like, you know, you haven't seen the following movie, but you'd probably like it. And we did an experiment, and in fact, this was a pretty good way of doing it. But there was another interesting side effect. We actually had each person expressed as a linear combination of 10 other people. And we had asked everybody whether they wanted to be identified by name or not. And most people said they didn't mind being identified by name. So you got this, when you finished with your questionnaire, you got this little printout that said, you are, you know, 0.08 times Joe Smith plus 0.07 times Frank Brown and so on. Plus, you know, 0.12 times somebody who has asked not to be identified. We actually got mail from somebody once saying, my God, you found my best friend from high school. I haven't seen him in 20 years. We got other letters from people saying, well, so you found this other person I'm like, but you haven't told me whether they're single and available. You know, how much of this do you want to do? Calendar and mail management. There's a new feature in some piece of Microsoft software that says, you just got an email requesting a meeting at such and such a time. I noticed that your calendar has nothing on it for that time. Shall I go ahead and schedule this meeting? Well, this is also something I don't really want. Then there's this whole question of advice giving. I once did suggest to some people at NCR that since your supermarket cash register now knows exactly what you bought, it could print out things like, you have just bought 2,000 calories, 500 grams of protein, 20 grams of fat. You know, your diet is low in B vitamins. You should go back and get some stuff. They somehow did not think this would be a step forward in selling their cash registers. And the question is how much of this should be going. I mean, one thing that I am surprised has not appeared and that I would like is I'm very surprised that no bank has sent me a mailing saying, if you do all your transactions with us, you give us all your savings, all your income, all your expenditures, we will do your taxes for you because we have all the information. I would think that some bank would do that and that it would be worth it to a lot of people. Sure, you know, I'll put all my accounts in one bank and they'll just send me my tax form at the end of the year. So I think this could be done. And in fact, some of these privacy things. There's this problem of what's helpful advice giving and what's undesirable surveillance. How many people here have an affinity card at their local supermarket, one of these club cards? Amazing. Usually, and I ask the audience, everybody has one in their household. Well, you know, if you have one of these, you're giving up an immense amount of personal privacy for $1 off on a...
What is this you're talking about?
The kind of card, when you go to the supermarket, they scan the card at the register and there are a few special items on sale that you get. Most people nowadays have one of these cards. And, you know, you're selling an enormous amount of privacy for $1 off on a pound of fish. Garrison Keillor talked about an interesting question of the rise of the shy. He said, at the moment in the world, loudmouths dominate. You know, most decisions are made in face-to-face meetings. The people that are bigger and louder and more aggressive often win. If the world moves to distributed behavior in which most meetings are not face-to-face, maybe they're just email discussion groups, then all of a sudden the ability to write a coherent paragraph will matter more than whether you're big and loud. And he talked about the rise of the shy people will take over the world. You know, I don't know. Will that happen? Would it be good if it happened? Well, he thought so. Recently, there's been a lot of talk about something called the digital divide, which refers to the fact that basically some groups in American society, notably those that are typically poor and disadvantaged, don't use the internet as much because they can't afford computers as the typical wealthy suburbanites. And the administration thinks this is bad, and NSF is trying to figure out how it could use some funding to do something about it. What bothers me is that the people on Madison Avenue describe the exact same phenomenon as the web has really good demographics. You advertise on the web, you get to rich people. So I don't know. And one of the big things is, well, how do we use gadgets like this so that we can work together? Because the whole theme of what Bush talked about, and a lot of what I'm talking about, is, well, we want to be able to share all this information. We want to get, you know, as I say, the way I see this is we start off with, you can remember everything you ever knew, and then you get to a state of you can find anything anybody ever knew. Now, that means there has to be a lot of cooperation. At the moment, there's an awful lot of people who think of information is valuable, and I'm not going to let any of it that I get out of my sight. Almost everybody, for example, who in the course of a computer break-in inquiry has dealt with the law enforcement agencies, says that the way they behave is they're always coming around asking you to tell them everything you know, and they won't tell you anything they know, and it gets very frustrating. So how do we teach people to work together better? I made this crack about patent first, talk later. There are real cases of students saying to their PhD professors, I'm not going to tell you what I'm working on until I've talked to the venture capitalists. You know, it might be valuable. And we have to understand how much we're going to want to share. So I will end up and say, what I care about in this world is preserving diversity. I like the idea that I'll be able to get all of the information I ever want, that I won't have to worry about forgetting. I'm getting to the age when I have to start worrying about forgetting things, and you know, I won't be president like, you know, some people with Alzheimer's. So how am I going to have a world where I can remember everything, find everything I want, but I don't want to have just a few things that everybody looks at. I like the diversity. I mean, to me, eBay, even though I don't particularly want all these crazy things, the concept that of eBay or bookfinder.com are very attractive to me. You can get anything you want. I don't like the concept of, well, maybe we'll go towards something like television. And one interesting thing is that means you have to be willing to accept poor production values. If you insist that anything you watch is going to have to look like the movie Titanic, then you're going to be limited to a very small number of things that were produced at great expense. If you're willing to accept the idea that you'll look at an amateur production, then there'll be a lot more things to look at. But what it really comes down to, given the way the world works, is, you know, would you buy the gadget? If somebody actually shows up and says, okay, for $1,000 you can have this gadget, it'll remember everything you did, and you can just go and ask it things, and then in 2 years we'll have the wireless modem and you can go out and access, you know, the whole web. My guess is that yes, this would sell, and you know, we'll see a notable change in which people are, you know, more distributed, less focused on are they near a big library and whatnot. But we'll see. It's not actually a project that anybody is working on at the moment, as far as I know. Okay, I'm going to cut it there and take questions. Any questions? Yes?
In the earlier part of your talk, you talked about the limits of how much information a person can view and absorb during their life. As a corollary, there must be a limit on how much they can produce. So my question is, does this mean that eventually the search engines can be centralized, one service can capture all information of mankind?
There is certainly a limit as to the total information produced. At the moment, there seem to be enough, okay, I guess there's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is. There are many search engines now, but as far as I can see, they do not differ in significant ways. I don't really, and they'll get mad at me for this, that, oh, Direct Hit does query matching and Alta Vista does document matching, and Alta Vista has more documents than Google, but fewer than all the web. But basically, it seems to me they're all doing the same thing and they're being differentiated by advertising. Will there someday be a monopoly search engine? At the moment, I don't see the economic reason why there should be. They're relatively cheap to write. The economics of search engine companies. The search engine companies are limited at the moment by the ability to get staff. I was flabbergasted. I heard a talk by Larry Page of Google. The Google machine room has 2,500 computers in it. They buy 30 computers a day. Now, 500 of the computers are broken. They cannot spare the staff time to fix them. Basically, he said the only thing limiting us is staff. So my sense at the moment is the cost of entry to producing search engines is low enough that there's no reason there should be a monopoly on it. Anything else? All right. Yeah.
A first comment is when you spoke about combining material from the experiences and memories of various people,
Yeah.
the thought that popped to mind very quickly was Rashomon.
Which what?
The Japanese
Oh,
movie
Rashomon, yes, yes.
And the fact that different perceptions, different people will see and remember things
Yeah.
differently. There are interesting questions of reconciliation, and one asks what really happened, say as in a criminal investigation or the like. There will be processes that go beyond recall and reclamation.
Yeah.
The other part had to do with, I wonder if you would associate for a moment with the phrase associative memory. That is going in and just looking for
Yeah.
specific hard facts, bits of information, nuggets in such an enormous universe. Sounds kind of hopeless without some sort of associative mechanism.
Well,
Because you don't go in and say, where did I leave my sweater, perhaps, but where did I leave clothing, where was I? It's a much more general question from which you have to sort of branch out and figure out exactly what needs searching.
yes, I mean, there is this very real problem of how you, whether it is more effective to search by asking for more general concepts or by trying to make a very specific search. It's very, if somebody says to me, look for something interesting, that's a different question from tell me what year Columbus sailed across the Atlantic. And we don't know enough about the vaguer, harder to deal with questions. So yes, we need more research of that. So that's one of the things that I think would be an elaboration of the general question of search. Now, the Rashomon thing is fascinating. Is would you have the ability to look at events in some sense through other people's perception? One comment is that I once had occasion to, as part of studying a foreign language, to read a book in that language, which was a biography of somebody whose life I knew something about from reading about it in English. And I was flabbergasted by the different view that this biographer had. I mean, somebody who was, as far as I knew, a fairly dour and boring Scotsman was turned into a great romantic figure because that's what the French want to read about. And so I thought this was fascinating as a view of the world, aside from whether I was going to learn any French this way. So yes, I think it's fascinating to ask the question of, what would you see differently if you were in some sense looking through somebody else's eyes?
When you say the Library of Congress has 20 terabytes of book information, what assumptions are you making about compression?
Oh, that's a fairly straightforward number. It assumes that there are about 20 million books, there's about 23 million now, that you're simply typing them in ASCII, and that we've ignored the pictures in the books. It's just basically the straight text. And in fairness, there aren't all that many pictures. My guess is that if I used reasonable compression on the pictures in the books, they would fit in the fact that most books aren't as long as a megabyte. But all the real number is 20 million books times a megabyte each.
But even for the text, at that volume, it would seem to be advantageous to have a very good language model to really compress information content down quite a bit.
Oh, well, you could get a factor of 3 fiddling the characters, but if you really want to say I'm going to do intellectual compression and say, oh, just another Stephen King imitator, you know, yeah, you might be able to reduce a whole lot of books to 3 bits, but this gets, I mean, the real reason why you would want to do that is searching not to save storage. The storage costs are not the issue, but the issue is that it might be very useful to do really good compression. One of the interesting comments that I don't understand is compression and searching ought to be strongly related, because when you throw away things that are not perceptually important to humans, you also ought to be throwing away things that are not worth searching for. So it ought to be easy to search in the compressed domain, and yet there's essentially no searching in the compressed domain. You know, there's some image searching, but most searching starts by blowing back to the original signal. So I don't really understand why this is going wrong, but there ought to be a place somewhere for doing your extreme compression and then using it for searching. Okay.
At what stage are we in applying IT technology to the healthcare sector? And do you believe that national health insurance can be feasible?
The healthcare sector is one of the most rapidly growing web areas. I have heard claims that something like a quarter of the web use is people chasing their own health issues. I find that hard to believe, but I saw the claim. At the moment, I don't think there's a perceptual effect on the national health. I think mostly people are just amusing themselves reading about things. But I think there's a huge potential here. I think Ben Schneiderman once proposed that there should be a national goal of when you walk into a hospital, within 1 minute, they should not just have your chart up on the screen, but they should find the 100 people with the most similar medical history in the last 6 months and put up an anonymized version of their chart with what happened to them. And I think that actually would make a significant difference to U.S. healthcare statistics. But I don't have any evidence to support that. It's you know, Ben and I Ben speculating and then me speculating on what he speculated. Yeah.
What's your personal opinion on whether the race for protection of privacy and ways to convey privacy, which will win?
I'm sorry, I think invasion is going to win. I don't see, I mean, I look at, even in my own life, the convenience of using credit cards all over the place, the, you know, convenience of, you know, the Washington Metro offers me a choice of a smart card, which among other things would let them make an exact list of where I was when, and an anonymous paper ticket, and I chose to buy the smart card. I decided I didn't care if the Washington Metro could someday print out a database of exactly where I had been. And I think that most people are making decisions like that. And there's such a strong economic push to, you know, gather every bit of information you can about everybody. And of course, in some sense, if the marketers were better at this, they wouldn't send me so much junk mail, because they don't want to send me junk mail I'm not going to answer, but they can't tell which ones I'm going to answer. So my gut feeling is at the moment, the privacy is going to lose in favor of better marketing. You may think that's a disaster or not, as the case may be, I don't know. Yes?
Do you think there's implications legally having that kind of information available?
Oh,
Proving
yeah.
that you're at a certain place at a certain time?
Of course. I mean, one of the things I joke with people about is this business of cameras that identify people. We're not that far, I mean, yes, the British were bluffing, but we're not that far away from having surveillance cameras that really do make lists of every person who's walked through their field of view. And my guess is that the public attitude towards this will be heavily determined by whether the first story that gets into the tabloid newspapers or onto you know, the Oprah show is lost 5-year-old baby found by, you know, TV camera system, or, you know, Supreme Court justice found to be visiting psychiatrist in secret. And if I were the maker of the system, I might pay some mother to lose her 5-year-old for half an hour. So, yeah. Certainly the police would love to have a system where they could just say, okay, who was on that street corner? This is why, for example, you have the FBI insisting that they don't want digital telephony because it's too easy to encrypt and too hard to wiretap. And I used to argue at Belcour on the question of it would not be difficult in a digital PBX to put a disk into the PBX and store every phone call for 24 hours. Is there any ethically justifiable service you could sell based on that? We never came up with an answer. We never thought of one. But I suspect that there is one somewhere. Actually, we did find one. They never managed to sell it. There are stockbrokers who do want to record every single conversation they have in case the person on the other side of the bargain tries to deny that they agreed to buy or sell this particular stock. So there are people who would like to simply record every phone call, but we never actually managed to sell anybody a PBX this way. Similarly, it's not difficult to make a digital copier that has a disk in it and remembers everything you copied for the last day if you ever want to copy again. But again, it hasn't been marketed yet. I think we should probably call it quits now.